So let's talk form controls. And in this container right here, I have a bunch of different controls using 3 different form types. TextArea, we have select, and all of these here are inputs. So in this example, we're just going to go through, kind of show how you can style them, the different ways you can style them, some little nice to haves, and a little bit of how to work with Angular to get the effects that you want. So the first control here, I just wanted to show you what one looks like without any class structure assigned to it. So we put the input with no class, and I had to wrap it in a div because it's just going to come right next to this label class. It'll just span right next to it, and that didn't look kind of the same. So we added a div here just to get that effect. So the next one here, we have a typical control. We have form control of type text, and we did a parent label ID to this label here called for parent label. So those have to match, and if those match, then screen readers can read out this title that'll tell you about this input control, so it'll know what it's called. If you don't use that, we'll show you how you can use that over here. But we have a two-way binding with ngModel to this backend string property called test parent, and I'm bound to it a few places around here just because it was just an example. All right, so the next one, we're going to use a div instead of a label. And with this, we need to, for the help of screen readers, we need to kind of give you a description of what this input is. So here we're going to describe using div instead of label, but we don't have to put the for in the ID. And remember, you got to put the for in the ID in order to get the screen readers to tell what this is labeled. So the next one we have here is a slightly different type of control called form floating, and it is this one right here. And as you see that the label pops up above the input control. And there's a couple things to consider here. You need to put the label below the input, and once again, you need to match these parent labels here, but you also have to add a placeholder. If you don't add a placeholder, this doesn't work. Don't know why, but that's one of the rules. So the next one here, we're going to do large input. So once again, for the label, we match the for and the ID, and we use the form control, and we use form control large, and we're type text, and we're just binding to that same test parent. Similar thing here, we have small input, form control, SM. So those are the different looks here. Here's a large control, kind of looks like this. Here's a small input. And so the sizing's pretty distinct, different from the medium one right here. So the next thing we have here is an input group. In this input group, you can assign an input group text to a span. You can also use a label if you'd like. And it allows you to kind of get this little side label that we have right here. So it's a little gray, and then it backs up right next to this input element that's right there. So one thing I wanted to do, because this is a little confusing for me when I first looked at it, so I kind of have this nice little trick that is pretty good to use. So let's say you're coming over here and you're looking at this side label and you click on it. You can get an autofocus if you bind to the onClick event and then just use the name of the ID, focus input, dot focus, and it'll focus in on the input. So if you had a bunch of these stacked up, name, email, address, you could have these little labels here and just click on them and they would automatically go to the input. So let's look at the next one here. So we have, this is a input group again with a button. So kind of the same deal, but you put a button class. It's just an example to show that you can add a button here. We could also, let's do this, add a span here. This is not going to match up, but that's not too important. But you see we have side label, that behind it there. We have side label, the input, and then the button input. Additionally, we got 2 of them, 2 side labels, and a button on the end. So if we want to have these nice and tight and concise, you can add labels, and you can add the labels on the side. And you can also add it at the end. We could do some weird stuff here, look a little funky. But we can add all these side labels over here with the button right there. So we can do a lot of stuff with this. This basically any input group text after input group is going to create this effect. Let's go ahead and get this out. And as you see on the input, we don't have to change anything. It's just form control here. So same thing here, but we have 2 buttons. We have a confirm and a clear input group. And we just basically don't have to do anything other than just set the order of how we want everything to be. So we have an input here that goes first, and then 2 buttons, second and third. So, and just to kind of show you, if I type in here, it kind of populates everything here, and I got a little clear button just to show you how you can do a test parent equals nothing here just to reset everything. All right, so now we have disabled and read-only. So I did the same thing. I kind of put this side element here in the input group, and notice instead of using a span, I just used a label. So we have the input next. It is bound to, oops, wrong. So this is bound to is disabled. And over here, I have a click event on the button called toggle. So basically I can turn this disabled off, type in it, turn it back on, can't type in it, go and clear that out. Same thing here with the read only. We can toggle that off, type in it, toggle it back on. And the other thing I did, and just to show you how you can use string interpolation, I bind it to the is disabled and is read only to change between a primary button and a warning button right here. So there's just some little tricks you can do. Is disabled equals not is disabled, and that can just toggle between the different states. So let's go to the next one here. We're going to go talk about file input. So if you do this, you're going to have a different input type. It's not going to be text. It'll be called file, and you're going to access the file with this change event, and we'll show you how that works. So here, if I click on the file, I could pick one of these files, and it's going to put the name right here. And on the back end here, we'll show you that change. So this is an add file. It takes an event type. You pull out the target here, and we just have to do some null checks for the compiler. So we grab the target off the event, and off the target we grab a file list called files, and then we grab the first file in there, and that has all of the data, the size, the name, the type. And with that, usually you have enough information to pass to a server to save the file. So that's how, this is kind of the base code for a file. You'd have to do something with it, otherwise you're just kind of storing the data back here and not doing anything with it. So, and remember, access that with the change, not with the ng model or anything else. So the next one we have is a color input. So here's the color input. Let's just show you what it looks like without the color input. So you get this control out of the box, but it looks a little plain. So we're going to add this back in, just kind of show you how it works. We go here, we click one of these, and then we get the hex code down here. And that basically is what you're doing. You can store that color data and use that color data wherever you need to do it. So next thing we have here is a text area, and same thing, form control. It just has a rows property that you're going to want to set, because you can make this bigger or smaller, and it can type whatever you want to here. Go ahead and clear that. So the next one we have is a range control. So we have a type of range, and we're going to use form range as opposed to form control. We have a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 20. So we did the type range. And we're going to bind to a property in the back end, which is a number called range. Clever. So if we use this slider, we can change this. And as you see, there's really nothing giving you any indication. So I went and I bind it to the range value here, which is a number, but it's treated as a string, and just put it right there just so you have an idea of what's going on. So the next one we have a single select. So here's our select control. It's form select. All these options have a value of a type string. We can use something called ng value if we want to bind to a different type, if we're using some Angular backing. We'll show you how to do that later. But just know that this value is going to be a string. It's going to bind to a selected item, which is right here. And we can basically go ahead and choose whichever one we want, and it'll store the value. And that's how that works. Pretty simple. Similar thing over here, we have multi-select. So here in order to do that, we have the multiple value right here. And let's show you, if we take this size out, those two additions, use a size and use multiple. So if we take that size out, it'll size it a little big. So we want to size it to the number of options we have here. So if we don't know that, then maybe we need to count that if it's an array of variable size objects that we're passing in and we're looping through these objects. And once again, we'll show you how to do that later, but we can calculate the size. So you're going to want to keep this basically matched up with these values here so that everything seems nice and tight. Notice we have a disabled little scroll bar right here. So, in the multiple, what it allows you to do, it doesn't allow you to select multiples in single clicks, but you can hold down the control button and select them all, or you can hold down and drag and select them all, or select two if you like. So this is what this multi option allows you to do. It allows you to drag and drop multiple options. So I didn't really like that effect. So I did a custom multi-choice one right here. And we'll run through all of this. Once again, form select, size 3. We have multiple, and we disabled it. We disabled it to get some of the effects out, mostly the jittering, because whenever the back end select change event hit, it was kind of flickering. So we added this just to kind of make this work. And we also added some CSS, and we'll show you that here. So notice this form select class we have noted. We have form select, and because it's disabled, we're going to turn off the background, make it white, and we're going to override it with this important. We're going to turn off the overflow, which is this right here, because it was kind of ugly, and make it hidden. And we're also, just to get a little blacker dark right here, we're going to show you how this is a little lighter. This kind of disabled, it was kind of a little gray, so I added this to make it a little darker. So we use these CSS overrides to kind of get this effect of I can just click on this, because normally what it was doing, I would select one, and we'll show you the code in the back end of what's going on, but then it would flicker, it would refresh and redraw. So I wanted to get rid of that. So we'll just kind of show you how this works real quick. So we have the normal select up here, but on all these options, we have a couple things. We have a selected item to denote what is selected, and we have a method we call to check if this value is part of a list of items that we're storing. And then we run through this multi-select object here, which is denoted by this pound multi-select, or I could use ID. We basically pass this in to do the actual selection. So let's show you how this works. So here's our head file. So just to show you this is selected, I have this selected array that I'm adding this value to. So this is basically the target, and on the target it's just an element here, and it has the value, which you see, basically it's grabbing this whole element here, the option. And it's got a value of 1, and it's grabbing this element dot value, which is a string of 1. And it's checking if it exists. And I'm checking in an array because if it can find it, it's going to be 0 or above. If it can't find it, it's -1. So if it is 0 or above, I'm going to run this command called splice, and it basically takes the index, if it was 0 index, and it removes one object in this case. I can move multiple ones if I wanted to, but I just want to remove one. So that's how we're going to get rid of an object that we, let's say, come here and select off. So if that's not true, then we're just going to add this to the array. And as you see, this array right here checks to see if the value 1, 2, or 3, which is over here, 1, 2, or 3, is in this array. And we're using this this function sum, and it just checks if the value, which would be 1, 2, or 3, which is denoted by this S, is equal to the value of the string that we pass in. And we have this here originally for the flicker problem. I should probably take this out. And basically what I do here is I take this option, which, just going back here, is this multi-select. As you can see, the multi-select object here, which is this whole selection object. And I pass it in. We look at the length of these options. and we check if the array has it, and basically the array that we just added. If we can find this value of this object in the array, we take the value of this options object at the index of 0, in this case 0, 1, or 2, and we turn the select on to true or false. So this was basically clearing everything and then reselecting based upon the selection. So that caused the flicker, hence the disabling to stop the flicker. That was the best way that I found to get rid of that. But that's basically what's going on here. So hopefully I explained that. We'll go into more detail about how to do some of this stuff later on. But for now, that's just how we did this particular thing. All right, so now on to checkboxes and radio buttons. So we got a couple different examples here. So here on this first checkbox 1, checkbox 2, we have this form check element wrapping an input and a label and binding to a Boolean. So here's one Boolean, here's the other for check 1 and check 2. So these are these two right here, and basically each one binds to a Boolean, and we can set it as we see fit. So by default, we started the first one as true. As you can see right here, I'm going to change this just to kind of show you how it sets everything up. True or false, it'll bind to this. And as you see, that one defaults to true. So we can turn it off and turn the other one on as we like. So if we want these to not break lines, if we want them to just span and take up the space that they need, we can add this dash n line to this form check. So same thing here, form check input, form check label. We got a type of checkbox, don't think I mentioned that. And we're binding to another Boolean, check in line 1, check in line 2. So we have those right here. Once again, that was started up. Set this other one true also. Restart everything, and both will be set up. So you can see you can just toggle these back and forth, and it'll switch these bools on or off. So you have to have this different items for each one, or some way to calculate that on the back end using some bound property that's a bool. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is radio, and radio is a little different. So radio, instead of binding to different Boolean objects, we're going to bind to a string object, and that string object is going to contain the value that we pass here. So right here we have radio 1 and radio 2, that's the value set. So here, let's see what we defaulted to. So we defaulted to radio 2. I could turn this to radio 1. And as you see, radio 1 is set. And that's because this value here, which is the same here, is set to the radio 1 here, not the radio 2. If you didn't have it bound and you were wanting to toggle between them, you have to add this the name equal the same. But since we're setting the value of string here and we're matching the value here, we can actually get rid of this. Normally, this would prevent being able to select multiple radio buttons together, because it doesn't know what's the grouping of radio buttons, and that's kind of the way, by naming them all the same, you'll force that check. But since we're binding to the value, and the value's in this radio toggle, it'll do the same thing. See here, we're switching between the two. So the last thing we're going to do, and the other thing is that's a type of radio. That's really the only big difference. It's these two values right here, different radio, and you got to set the value that the string takes. And I did mention, we showed you that. So the last thing we're going to do is really the same as the first checkbox up here. Only difference is we're going to change this to a switch. So if I just took this out, this is all I got to change. It just goes back to the other view. So basically everything that we showed you with the checkbox is the same here. I got a bool property attached here, a bool property attached here. And switch. All right. So we could turn these both on in this case, just to show you that they're both switched on by default. So these are just different views that you can use. If you want to, we could make this inline if we like. Inline. And have the same effect here. So that's pretty much what we're doing. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, post them down at the bottom of the video, subscribe, or all the other fun stuff that you can do online. Thanks.